will walk us through a journey of learning how to install Angular to learning how to route from one page to another. Angular CLI to test and deploy your Angular application, creating components in Angular, and using selectors and templates. With that, you'll also learn about creating and importing modules to create your Angular application. This course will also help you discover about different data binding techniques. In this course, you'll learn what are services and how you need to inject them wherever you need them. In this course, you'll also learn about different types of forms and creating them in Angular. We will also see how to route from one page to another using routing in Angular. By the end of this course, you'll be able to develop an end-to-end demo Angular application of your own. Some of the prerequisites for this course will be basic knowledge of HTML and JavaScript, and you're all good to go. Hope everybody is excited and set to learn Angular. Welcome to the first section of this course, Angular for Beginners, with we need to know how to set up the development environment. And the very first step to do that is to see how to install Node.js. Let's go and see how to install. So to install Node.js, we simply come to the browser and type install Node.js. So the very first link that comes up is the one which we have to go for. This is nodejs.org/en/download. Now, according to our operating system, we'll decide which one to go for. Since this one is Windows 64-bit, so I'll go for this one. If you're using Mac or Linux, you need to go for these options. So right now, I click on 64-bit MSI file, which is the setup file for my Node.js download. I download it here. Now that our setup file has been downloaded, let's click on it and try to run it. Say accept the terms and go next. You can choose where you want to install it by changing the path to it. I'm okay with this path, so let's move ahead. Install. So now let's wait for it to get installed. And let's say finish. Now to check if Node.js has been installed, let's go to our Windows. Here we can see this Node.js file. Now to check if Node.js has been successfully installed, let's go to the command prompt cmd and type node-v, or you can say version here. So if it gives you the version, that means Node.js has been finally and successfully installed for you. If there is some error, then you need to check again where the problem is. So for me, Node.js has finally been installed and the version is v8.12.0. That's it. So as we have already installed node.js in our machine, let us go and check if npm package is also installed with the node.js. To check that, we will type on the command line interface. To check that, we will type on the command prompt npm version, that is -v. If it shows some version, that means we have npm installed. Okay, yes, so we have npm version 6.4.1 installed in our machine. Now the next step to do is the very important step, which is to install Angular CLI. So to do that, we will type npm install -g @angular/CLI and say enter. So this is the command which helps us install Angular CLI within our machine. Now we need to check if Angular is finally installed or not. To do that, we use ng space -version, or you can simply say v. So let's type ng space -version, or you can simply say v. So let's say enter now. Great. Angular CLI is successfully installed for us. It shows the version of Angular CLI. It also shows us the version of Node. And then it shows us various packages inside Angular CLI which have been installed for us, like RxJS, TypeScript, and various other dev kits. In this part of the section, we will see how to create a new Angular project using the Angular CLI that we just installed in our machine. So to do that, we use the command ng, which stands for Angular. So let us type ng new, because we are making a new project now, and the name of the project. Let us call our project as first project. So ng new and the name of your project is the command to make a new Angular project. Also make sure that you have given the right path. For me, I am inside desktop, and under that, inside a folder called Angular apps, I am creating this new app. For you, you can choose the path yourself and then create this project. So now let me say enter. Great, so Angular CLI just created our new project for us. Here it says added 1081 packages from contributors. Also it says git is not recognized as an internal external command. As of now, we can simply ignore that. So now to open this project that we just created, we need to use this command code space dot, and let's say enter. This command will open our project inside Visual Studio Code. So inside Angular apps, we just created our project, first project. Here it is. Also, when we expand the source file, that is src, inside app, we can see that it already created some files called app.component.ts, which is the TypeScript file, app.module.ts, also the module. This was the component. Then it also created HTML file, CSS file, and a spec file. So this is how we can create a project and the files inside it using CLI. So simple. So now that we are inside our project, let's go to app.component.ts, which is our TypeScript file. Here is the syntax already written for it by Angular CLI. And if we go to app.component.html, this is what is going to be on the view. So let us make some change here. Let us simply say, hi, I am excited to learn Angular. Let us just say this as of now, and let us remove these other statements which are mentioned here. That is it. Let me just save it, and now I will see how to run this project. So now I'll go to CLI after saving my project, and here going inside the project. To go inside the project, I'll say cd, that is change directory, the name of my project, which is first project. And after this, I'll simply say ngserve. ngserve is the command to run your Angular application. ngserve. serve. And now I'll say enter. So this will basically compile my Angular application or Angular program that I just created. We can see CLI just compiled our program. It says compiled successfully. Also, you can see here that Angular CLI is running this project on this port number, that is localhost 4200. So when we go to the browser to check our results, we need to open localhost 4200. So now our program is compiled successfully. I'll go to the browser now and type localhost 4200. The name comes here as first project, that is the title of our project, and I'll say enter. Great. So we had written, hi, I'm excited to learn Angular. That comes on the browser. Also, this logo was already inserted by the Angular CLI. So that is how you run your project in Angular. This was the very first step of starting with your Angular project. Another very quick and important thing to understand here is that whenever we are compiling our Angular application, This might happen that the port number that you're using is already occupied with some other project. So to change the port number, there's a very simple command that you need to execute. That is the same command ngserve, which is used for compiling, you'll use. So let's say ngserve, and suppose your port number 4200 that we were using in the earlier part of the section is already in use. So to change that, you will say ---- twice. Then you'll say port space, and you can give any port number that you want to. Suppose earlier it was 4200, now let's give it 2500. So you want that this time when you run your application, it should run on port 2500 instead of 4200. I'll say enter now. Great. So CLI just compiled our program successfully, and this time instead of saying localhost 4200, it says open your browser on localhost 2500. So now let's go to the browser and try this. Here in the browser, I'll type localhost. Instead of 4200, I'll say 2500 and enter. Great. So the first project that was running on localhost 4200 earlier has changed its port number to 2500, and the project is exactly the same. So this is how we can change the port number in Angular CLI. Welcome to the components section of this course, Angular for Beginners. In this section, we will focus on what are components and how they are useful for the Angular applications. So defining a component, it's basically a combination of a template, a class, and some metadata. So let us start with what actually a template is. Anything that goes on the view, which is in the form of an HTML file, is known as the template. Component also comprises of a class. A class is the place wherein all the code, the properties, the methods, everything defining what's going to happen in the application comes. The class is generally preceded by a component decorator that we'll discuss in the next part of it. Then component also comprises of some metadata, which contains all the information about the class, about the Angular application. So this is the syntax of a component. There's generally a class which is preceded by a decorator. This is the decorator component, which actually defines that this class is actually a component. Inside the component, there are various things. The major things are selector, template. So selector contains a name, which is the name of your component, which is going to be used on the view. Then this template section, it contains all the HTML code. In this section, we will be discussing how to add a component using Angular CLI to your Angular application. We will also discuss how to add a component manually instead of using CLI. Then we will see what is the difference between using template or a template URL. We will also see what are style and style URLs, and that is about this section. In this part of the component section, we will discuss how to create a component using Angular CLI. Some of the prerequisites to create a component are we should have an installed CLI, of course. We also need to have a generated Angular project so that inside that project you are able to create the new component. We also need to have some npm packages installed. If not installed, you can install them using npm install command on the CLI. To proceed creating an Angular component using CLI, the command used for that is ng, which stands for Angular, generate to generate, component, and then the component name. You can give any name to your component. So there is an alias to it also. G stands for generate, C for component, and then the usual component name that you're going to give to your component. So this is the command that is used to create a component using CLI. And this is the short form of that. So now let's go to the CLI and try creating a new component. So inside the command line interface, that is our CLI, notice that we are already inside a project. That means we don't need to create one. Our project is called proj2. Inside this project now, we want to create a new component. So for that, we'll use this command that we just saw, ng generate component. Suppose let's call our component BPB, ng generate component BPB. Let's just say enter and wait for the component to be generated. Great, so a component just got created. So we also need to notice that there are many other files that are created along with the TypeScript file, that is the HTML file, spec file and the CSS file. One more very important thing to notice here is that the Angular CLI has already updated app.module.ts, telling it that a new component has been generated and that it has been added to the app.module. So now let us come to Visual Studio Code to see how the new component has been generated. So inside the src folder, we have this app folder, and inside this app folder, this new folder BPB has been created, inside which 4 of the files, that is the HTML, CSS, TypeScript and the spec file have been put. So there are times when you don't want to create a new folder and instead you want the component file to be created directly under the app folder. In that case, what we do is, while creating the component using CLI, we simply use one command. Let me just write that. So we'll use the same command that we used above, nggc. We are using the short form now. And now that we have already created BPB folder, we need BPB component, we need to create some other component now. Let's say BPB1 is the name of our new component. But I don't want to create a new folder called BPB1, and instead I want this component to be created under the app folder. So for that we have a command called --flat equals to true. So this command will do nothing, but it will create this new component BPB1 inside directly app folder, and it will not create a new folder for that. Let's say enter now. Great, so again it has created the HTML file, spec file, the TS file and the CSS file. It has also updated the app.module.ts. So now let's go to Visual Studio Code and check the file, the new folder that has been created. So if I close this BPB folder now, and there is no folder called BPB1, but we have these files BPB1, BPB, CSS, HTML, spec file, TS file, all inside the app folder and not inside any other new folder. So that is what we wanted. This is the role of CLI in creating a new component. It can be inside the app folder directly or inside any new folder that you have created. In this part of the section, we will see how to create a component manually. By saying manually, we mean going to the Visual Studio Code and creating it in there. Let's see how. So here inside Visual Studio Code, I want to create a new component manually. So I go to src folder. Inside that we have this app folder. I want to create a new component inside directly this app folder. So I go to this create new file option. Also, if you want to create a component inside a new folder, you can go to this new icon which is new folder, and you can create a new folder here, and inside that your component file will come. I want to create it directly inside the app folder, so I create a new file. Now the convention that you use is you can give any component name, let's say bpb.component.ts, which stands for the TypeScript file. So I say enter now. My component file just got created. Now this is step 1 of it, that is we have just created the component. Now another very important step is that you need to register this inside your module. So now you go to your app module, and there you need to register your newly created component, which is BPB component. So you'll import BPB component from, you can copy it from here, and instead of app you can say BPB. Right. Also in the declarations you can mention BPB component. So this is the step 2 of importing your component, registering it in the module. Now there is one more important thing to do here, that you need to write something in your BPB component. So there's a class, let's say export let's say export class BPB component, and this needs to be decorated with the directive component capital C. Now the syntax for this is round braces and inside that curly braces. Close them. This is the syntax of creating a component. Now this exactly is your file, component file. Now your component has finally been created. Now there was a red line. Now there was a red line if you noticed last time here. Now it's finally imported, registered in the module, and your component has been created. Inside the component there are two major things that come, that are selector, which is actually the name of your component to be put on the view. So let's call it app bpb, comma. There is other thing called template, which is actually the HTML or anything that goes on the view. So this is how you declare your component. This is your bpb component file generated. That is about adding your component manually. Step 1, to create a component from here, new file. Step 2, go to the app module and register it, import it, put it in the declarations. Step 3 is to finally describe or define inside your component what to write. There's a selector inside the component decorator, then there's a template, and exporting your class bpb component. That is it. Inside the decorator @component, we have two things. There is one called selector and the other called template. Now you might have seen that in some projects you have something written as template, whereas in some other there is something called template URL. So how do you differentiate between both of those? So let's clear that today. When you say template, you actually write the HTML code inside the TypeScript file itself. But whenever you say template URL, in front of that you just give the URL of your HTML file that is created separately. It's like the internal and external concept of CSS or HTML files. Let's see how. So inside Visual Studio Code, when you have this component decorator, you have selector and template. Instead of this template, you can also have template URL. Let's see the difference between both. So when you write template here, you want to write the HTML within the TypeScript file. So to do that, you need to use these symbols, and inside this, you have to write all of your HTML files. So you can say h1, and mention anything here. Let's say hello, this is simple, or you can say this is template inside the TS file. So this is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is, instead of doing it simply inside template, you can do it inside template URL. So for that, you need a file which is an external HTML. So for that, we need to create one new HTML file for this new component. So let's say here bpb.component.html. So this is the new created file, which is the HTML file to be used here, the URL of which will be used here. So here let's say bpb.component.html. That is it. So you took the URL of this file, which is the external file bpb.component.html, and put it here. Now all the HTML that is required on the view will come from this external file, which is bpb.component.html. So these are the two ways of integrating your HTML into your component class file. The same goes for the CSS file using styles and style URLs. So to integrate your CSS file inside your component class file, one way is using styles, in which you directly write the CSS file internally, and the other way is style URLs, in which you integrate the CSS file using some URL and you put it in there, and the separate file has your all CSS in it. Let us see how. So suppose you want to integrate your CSS file internally first. So for that you will write styles and square braces. Inside that, these symbols which you use for template also, and you can write your CSS file here. So let's say, for example, let's write it for button, height, let's say 30 pixels, comma, you take its border to be 0. So that is how you write your CSS file internally. Now in the other case, when you want to write your CSS file externally, for that you need to delete this, and instead of styles you write style URLs. So again, inside square braces we'll take strings and we'll write the name of our newly created CSS file. We have not created it yet, so we'll create it. Let's just name it bpb.component.css. So this is the externally integrated CSS file in the style URLs tag. Make sure you have to create this new CSS file as well. So let's create this new CSS file called bpb.component.css. That is all. You have externally created a CSS file and also integrated it inside your component.ts file. That is it about integrating your CSS file using styles and style URLs internally and externally respectively.